Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. You can see we have a lot to cover today. This is my book haul revisit for the month of April. If you're unfamiliar, this is where I go back to book hauls that took place in the month of April in the past and see how many of the books I have read, how many I still want to read, how many I have unhauled, and start the process of thinking about which ones I might want to unhaul. Maybe not now, but in the future. It's my way of holding myself more accountable as someone who purchases books on a regular basis. And I think it has worked. It has at least made me learn and understand more about how I read. And that has been helpful. For example, I tend to read nonfiction books on audio more than in print, but sometimes nonfiction books are pretty and I want to have them, so I do. Anyway, I have 5 years of April book hauls that we are going to look at, so we're going to go through this a little bit quickly. And just like with last month, which was the first month that I had 5 book hauls to look at, I have removed Sue Grafton books because I rebuilt my Sue Grafton collection. It's here on my shelves behind me, and it had a different purpose. I didn't buy those books to read them. I bought them because I wanted to rebuild a collection that I had gotten rid of in the past. I also got rid of books that were purchased for my Pulitzer Project. I got rid of anything that was gifted to me. I got rid of sort of library builders. Like I purchased every book that Louise Erdrich had bought used, and Toni Morrison. I got rid of things like that because the purpose of a library builder to me was a little bit different than the idea of purchasing a book hoping that you're going to read it soon or right away. So I got rid of those just to hopefully save time. Also, in the interest of saving time, I am not going to spend a lot of time talking about what all of these books are about. If you want that information, I will have links to the original book haul videos in the description box down below. You can go there and check out all of the information about the book that you could possibly want. I also usually read a little bit from the opening of the book. So that's fun, I think. And you can go down there and check all of that out. In the meantime, we're going to start with the most recent one. So that's April of 2023, and we're going to go back in time to April of 2019. So starting with 2023, the very first book that I brought into my library is something that I don't actually have, although I do still have the dust jacket, because my mother-in-law just finished reading it. We had loaned it to her. It's Arthur and Teddy Are Coming Out by Ryan Love. I did read this, and Joel read this, and now my mother-in-law has read this, so you can probably guess that we enjoyed this. It's a very cute book, and glad that we brought it in. Shades of Matt Kane is what I'll say, if you're familiar with Matt Kane, and I'm a fan of Matt Kane. So, yeah, this is a success story. I do still own the book. I just don't have it with me because she borrowed it and left the dust jacket here so she wouldn't end up damaging it. Interesting question. The original purpose of dust jackets is to protect the book itself. However, I, and a lot of people I know, including my mother-in-law, tend to want to protect the dust jacket because the dust jacket is actually what you see when you look at the book. So if the book itself is a little banged up or has little marks on it, I don't mind as much as I would if the dust jacket was torn or anything. So what do you do is the question. Are you more willing to protect the book by keeping the dust jacket on it at all times and at all costs, or would you rather protect the dust jacket? Because I would rather protect the dust jacket because it's what you actually see. But I would love to hear what you think, because I don't know, is that a weird thing to hold on to the dust jacket? I don't know. Let's talk about it in the comment section down below. The next book, I'm just going to take this down so I don't have to deal with the big pile of doom over there. The next book was, and then I'm going to start dropping stuff. So we're going to be really careful. Everything is chaos. The next book I brought into my library in April of 2023 was Felix Ever After by Kacen Callender. I have not read this yet, but it is on my long list for my pile of possibilities for Pride Month because I've already been working on that, and I really do want to read this book. I've heard some mixed things about it, but I still really want to read it. So this book's not going anywhere. I am hoping that I will get to it in the month of June, so that would be great. Then we have My Government Means to Kill Me by Rasheed. Newson. I did actually read this book. I can't remember if I read it during Pride Month last year or if I read it just over the summer. But point being, I did end up reading this book. And I don't think it's in danger of going anywhere. I liked it enough that it will probably be staying around on my shelf, even now that I have read it. So that was another success story. Ignore my calendar. Then, Nettleblack by Nat Reeve. I have mentioned I need to do a better job keeping track of where I get book recommendations. Someone on BookTube talked about this, and now, a year later, I don't remember who. But I was influenced to purchase this by someone who talked about it. It was not available in the US at the time, so I ordered this from the UK. It is a bit of a chunky book. I actually also have this on my long list for my pile of possibilities for Pride Month, so I would still like to read this, as you can guess, and I have not gotten around to reading it yet, but I am hoping to do so in the future, maybe in June. It is a big book, and the print is kind of tiny, but it sounded really interesting, and I would still be very curious to read it. The next book I brought into my library in April of 2023 was The Duchess of Bloomsbury Street by Helene Hanff. Early in 2023, I read 84 Charing Cross Road. I had gotten it from the library, and I was on a quest to try to track down a copy of 84 Charing Cross Road. I went into a used bookstore in Pullman because Joel and I spent big parts of March and a chunk of April in Pullman for our older dog, Jamie, who we had lost last year. But anyway, while we were there, I went in and they didn't have 84 Charing Cross Road. They did have this. So I got it and I read it very quickly. I mean, it's a tiny little book. You could dunk this in your coffee. So it would kind of be embarrassing if I hadn't managed to squeeze this in. I did. Thank goodness. In that same bookstore, I got a copy of Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck. I almost didn't include this in the book haul revisit because this was more of a library builder to me. For one thing, I really loved the edition of the book. It is really gorgeous. Look at this illustration of Charlie. Isn't that great? It's just so cool. And I love the end papers of the book. So odds are also that this is not a book I will read in physical format because I don't want to risk damaging the book. I would probably listen to it on audio. Joel actually just listened to this on audio. I think Gary Sinise read the audio. Anyway, I almost didn't include it for all of those reasons because it wasn't anything I had immediate plans to get to. It's really something I got for the edition of the book. So classic library builder status. However, it is a book that I want to read, and I had kind of been hoping that I would read it last year. So it felt like I'm not wrong to include it in the book haul revisit. And, you know, all of these parameters are kind of arbitrary anyway, just for the sake of time. So what does it really matter at the end of the day? I still haven't read Travels with Charlie. It's not going anywhere. Even if I never read this book, it's a gorgeous edition of it that I'm happy to have on my shelf. The final book I got from that same used bookstore was The Beautiful Room is Empty by Edmund White. Again, this one was a big down the line plan because I would need to read A Boy's Own Story by Edmund White first because this is a sequel to A Boy's Own Story. It's part of a trilogy. I just couldn't resist the opportunity to get it. So I haven't read it, and my barrier for entry with this is that I would have to read A Boy's Own Story first. And A Boy's Own Story is on my pile of possibilities for Pride Month. So I still plan to read this book, but it's going to be down the line because I need to get to another book by Edmund White first. So, of the 7 books that qualify for our purpose for the month of April 2023, I've read 3 books out of 7. That's Arthur and Teddy Are Coming Out, My Government Means to Kill Me, and The Duchess of Bloomsbury Street. I haven't unhauled anything, so they're all still here. Arthur and Teddy is just with my mother-in-law, and I have the dust jacket for now. So, you know, not a bad job for a year out from all of this. Let's go to April of 2022, and I'm going to take it down so, again, I don't just topple stuff over. The first book that I brought into my library in April of 2022 is True Biz by Sarah Novick. I have not read this book yet, and I still really would like to, and I'm hoping that I will get to it soon, but I said the same thing when I did my book haul revisit last year, I'm pretty sure. So, point being, I'm still very interested in reading this book, and I would really like to read it. So, it's not going to be going anywhere. I'm hoping I will read it in the future. Then I got a copy of Devotion by Hannah Kent. This one, for whatever reason, I remember who influenced me to purchase a copy. It was Jen the librarian. She talked about it and it being beautiful and kind of emotionally devastating. And that emotionally devastating part is what really has kept me from picking this book up, but I would still like to read it. And it's just a gorgeous book, by the way. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, but there is a lot of foil detail on the cover. There you go. You can really see it accents the waves when the light hits it. It's just a really gorgeous, beautiful book. I had also ordered this from the UK because at the time it was not available in the US. I don't know if that has changed, but I would still like to read it, so it is not going to be going anywhere anytime soon. Then Brickmakers by Selva Almada, translated by Annie McDermott. I did read this book. It's a tiny little thing, but it is brutal. It packs a punch, and I do think it's a little bit flawed, but I have thought about it a lot, and Selva Almada is currently on the shortlist for the International Booker Prize. I will put my reaction to the International Booker Prize shortlist down below. I think she might have a good chance at winning just because she is a very recognizable author, a popular author in South America. So I don't know. We'll find out what happens. But yes, this is a success story. I would potentially be interested in reading more of Selva Almada's books. And yeah, let's leave it at that. Then I got a copy of The Blackwater Lightship by Colm Tóibín. I have not read a Colm Tóibín book yet, and I really would like to. And I've been extremely indecisive about which one I would read. And I think Blackwater Lightship would be the first. But there's potential for me to do another one. I had this on my pile of possibilities for March because in March of this year, I was reading Irish books, and then I didn't accomplish a whole lot of what I had wanted to do. So I added it to my long list for my pile of possibilities for Pride Month because I really just want to read one of his books. And I think Blackwater Lightship would be the one that I would start with. Love in the Big City by Sang Young Park and translated, I believe, by Anton Her, although it is not on the cover. Yes, translated by Anton Her. This had been on the long list for the International Booker Prize back then. And I don't believe it made the shortlist, but I was interested enough that I ordered a copy. I can't remember if I think I ordered the US edition. I'd say this is an instance where I think the US edition is prettier than the UK edition, although I don't really remember what the UK edition is like, but I'm pretty sure I deliberately went for this one. A lot of people mostly say that the UK editions are usually better. There are cases where I think the US editions are better, and this would probably be one of them. Have not gotten around to reading it yet, but I would still like to. So it will hopefully be coming at some point in the future. And the same is true of Tomb of Sand by Gitanjali Shree, which ultimately won the International Booker Prize for that year. It is a big book. I've heard good things about it. I still want to read it. I just haven't gotten around to it. So hopefully soon. We'll see. It's not going anywhere, not in any danger. And, of the 6 books that I brought into my library in April of 2022, I haven't unhauled any, and I don't have plans to unhaul any. And looking at the books from April of last year, I don't have plans to unhaul any of them either. So that's where I at least can lie to myself and tell myself that I have learned more about myself as a reader and am doing better with my book hauls. Is that true? I don't know. Let's see what happens next month. But yeah, so none unhauled and none in danger of being unhauled. But I've only read one, and that was Brickmakers. However, I really want to read all of these books, so I'm going to call it a success story, even though I've only read 1 out of 6. April 2021 is a really interesting and unique case in terms of book haul revisits. I don't think this has ever happened before. There were 3 books that I brought into my library in April of 2021. I don't have any of them anymore. They're all gone, all unhauled. Only 2 of them were actually read before they were unhauled, and one of them was a violent unhaul. And that's the first one, which is Edinburgh by Alexander Chee. I really did not like that book a lot. I actually threw it across the room when I finished it in frustration because I really didn't like the ending of the book. I exorcised it from the house like a demon. It had to go. So I read it, but it's gone. And occasionally people will recommend Queen of the Night, Alexander Chee's other book, and Maybe someday in the future, but I would need a lot of time to let the taste from Edinburgh out of my mouth. Not the city. I'm really looking forward to visiting the city this year. The book. Totally the book. And the next one was Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu, which had won the National Book Award. And I actually ended up listening to this on audio, and I was not as aggressively looking to get rid of it when I was done, but I just thought it was okay. I didn't love it, so I didn't feel like I needed to keep it, if that makes sense. So I can't remember at what point I got rid of it. I think it was in the crunch that I had for space before Joel and I expanded my library, and I just needed space. And because I didn't love it and didn't think I was ever going to revisit it, I let it go. But I had read it, so there's that. The one that I didn't read was Liberty by Caitlin Greenidge. I was really excited to read that book when I first brought it into my library, and then the sense of urgency to read it really died over time. And over time, I just started thinking to myself, I feel like as time goes on, I'm less and less likely to read this book. And I believe there was an audio version of it available on Scribd, or whatever Scribd is called these days. I don't remember. And so I have it saved in there, but I just didn't see much reason to hold on to the physical book, so I got rid of it. So yeah, 3 for 3 with an unhaul in April of 2021, but I did read 2 of them. So 2 of the unhauls were just because I didn't really like the book enough to hold on to it. And then the third one, it just felt increasingly unlikely that I would ever get around to reading it. And if I did, I would probably do it on audio. So that is why that one is gone. Let's go to April of 2020 now. The first one I no longer have. It's A Woman of No Importance by Sonia Purnell. I had read this for the BookTube Prize. And April of 2020, you can guess, pandemic. Everything was in lockdown. So I wasn't really able to get it from my library. My library was like completely shut down at that point. I think they actually had a copy, but they were shut down. So I had to read it for the BookTube Prize. And I actually did like the book. I read it. And over time, I just decided I don't need to hold on to this. And I fully admit I only purchased the copy because I was going to be judging it in the BookTube Prize, and that was the only way I was going to be able to get myself a copy. So there it is. I did like the book. I thought it was good. I just didn't feel like I needed to hold on to it. I don't think I'm really going to revisit it or anything like that. So I read it, but it's not here anymore. Then, The Enlightenment of the Green Gage Tree by Shikufe Azar, and is this the one that has an anonymous translator? I can't remember. Yeah, it just says translated from the Persian. So I have not read this. At the time, a lot of people were talking about this book. It says it was shortlisted for the Stella Prize. I think it might have been in the mix for the International Booker, but don't quote me on that. But I know at the time a lot of people were talking about it. And it feels like mentions of this book have dropped off a cliff in the years since. So I admit the urgency to read it has died down almost completely. But every time I do see it on my shelf, I think, oh, I wanted to read that. So it's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. But I will say, because there's no urgency to read it, this is something that could end up in the same space as Liberty by Caitlin Greenidge. Because if there's no urgency to get to it, when am I going to get to it? So if you are one of the people who read The Enlightenment of the Green Gage Tree in April of 2020, let me know what you thought of it, because I'm not going to be getting rid of it anytime soon, but I am somewhat approaching a point where I might need reasons to keep it if I'm going to. So let me know what you thought of it in the comment section down below, or if you think it would be worth holding on to. I had also gotten a copy of Gachar Gochar by Vivek Shanbag. I did read this book. Again, it's a tiny little thing. So if I had not gotten to this, I would almost feel embarrassed. I admit I just thought it was okay. So this would almost end up in a realm like Interior Chinatown, where I wouldn't feel like I needed to hold on to it, except that it's so tiny and I don't need space in this part of the alphabet in my library. So for that reason, it's still here. But if I ever really do need space, even if just a little amount of space, I'm not emotionally attached to it to the point where I would hold on to it. But I'm totally fine holding on to it for now. And I did read it, so there's at least that. Then I think Sean the Book Maniac had talked about these books on his channel. I'm pretty sure that's where I found out about them. So Volume 1 and Volume 2 of My Brother's Husband by Gengoro Tagame. I did read these. These are such a delight. I'm not going to flip through them because there is nudity in the illustrations, but and odds are I wouldn't stumble into it. There's not that much in there, but it is there, and I don't want to, stumble into that. It is a manga, and I had not really read anything in that form before, so I kind of wanted to try that out, and I really loved these. Joel actually read these too and also loved them. It's so good. It's so good. If you haven't read My Brother's Husband, Volume 1 and Volume 2, get them. What I didn't know is that the storyline flows very directly into Volume 2. So you really need both volumes to get the whole story. I had started with Volume 1 because I thought, well, I'm going to try it, and if I like it, maybe at some point I'll read Volume 2. Well, first of all, I loved it. But second of all, it seems like they are intended to be read together. And because there are only 2 volumes, I'm not going to mind that too much. I don't tend to like series books where you're required to immediately go on to the next one. But because it's 2, because it's manga, it reads quickly. So I don't mind it all that much in this case. And it's a total delight. But that would be my PSA to you if you're thinking of trying one. If you're thinking of trying one, get both. Because if you like it, you're going to need to have both on hand. So learn from my mistakes. Then I had The Man Who Loved Children by Christina Stead. I remember at the time, I had actually kind of been looking for a paperback, but in that weird early pandemic time, for whatever reason, the paperback was not available. And this Everyman's Library edition was like $5 more than the paperback edition. So I had ordered it from an independent bookstore. And they asked, well, for $5 more, I can get you the hardcover right now. So I said, sure, why not? So this was almost like a library builder. I had no intention of reading it right away, but I really want to read it. So actually, technically, it doesn't really qualify for the metrics that I set for myself. But again, all of these rules are arbitrary and just designed to save time. So I don't end up spending 40 minutes talking to you about books that I brought into my library and whether or not I've read them. So I've heard great things about The Man Who Loved Children and would love to read it at some point. I don't have immediate plans to get to it, but I didn't have immediate plans to get to it back in April of 2020 either. Then there was The Guest List by Lucy Foley. I did read this one, and it was one of those books that kind of hit that status where I liked it. I'm not going to reread it. Do I need to hold on to it and keep space for it on my shelf? Probably not. So I ended up trading it in at my local used bookstore, but I did enjoy it. It is one of the few current mystery thrillers that I have read that I actually did have fun with. I don't know why. I really struggle with current mystery thriller books, but this one I kind of got along with. Then Valentine by Elizabeth Wetmore. Every year I wonder if I'm ever going to get around to reading this book, and every year people comment and tell me that they really like this book. But it is supposed to be sad or a little bit difficult from that perspective. So this is one of those books that could end up getting unhauled at some point because it does feel like the urgency to read it has really died down, very similar to The Enlightenment of the Green Gage Tree. It just feels like I don't have any urgency to read it anymore. And am I going to get around to reading it? I don't know. I think I have the audio saved on Scribd as well, or again, whatever Scribd calls itself these days. So it's not in danger of leaving right now, but there could be a future where this has exited my library. So let me know. Again, it feels like every year people say, no, that's a great book. You should read it. And then a year passes and I haven't gotten around to it. So I don't know. Let me know what you thought of it in the comment section down below. Maybe comments will give it another year in my library. So of the 8 books that I brought into my library in April of 2020, I've read 5. That is a pretty good track record. And let's give the caveat that 2 of those books were My Brother's Husband, and they're short and they go together, but it still counts. It still counts. So there were those 2. There was Gachar Gochar and A Woman of No Importance. and the guest list. Those are the 5 that I read out of the 8. And I've unhauled 2, and those were the guest list and A Woman of No Importance. Now let's go back to the final book haul that we have to discuss. I'm knocking things over on my desk because there's such a large volume of books taking up space around here. April of 2019. The first book I brought into my library back then was The Accidental Tourist by Ann Tyler. I got this book for $1 from my library because they have used books for sale. Actually, I think hardcovers are $2, so I think I probably got this for $2. But I read my first, no, actually, it was my second. I'm a mess. I read my second Ann Tyler book in December of last year, Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant, and I loved it. I had read Breathing Lessons a long time ago and did not like it, but I also think I was like 20 when I read it, and I think there's a chance that if I go back to it, I will appreciate the subtle emotional work that Ann Tyler puts into her books a lot more than I did back then. And I've heard great things about Accidental Tourist as well. So this is another book that's not going anywhere. I will hopefully be getting around to it at some point. I also ordered a copy of A Pale View of Hills by Kazuo Ishiguro and have not read it yet, but would still really like to at some point. And we'll see when that ultimately happens. I talked about Edmund White earlier. I had also brought City Boy, My Life in New York During the 1960s and 70s, into my library. So this is obviously a memoir of Edmund White living in New York City and the gay underground life that he experienced at the time. I almost read this book the year that I got it, and I read Dancer from the Dance instead, and it felt like that covered a lot of the same ground, so I decided to hold off on this one. And now I feel like if I'm going to read an Edmund White book, I'm going to start with A Boy's Own Story. But I still would like to read this one. And, you know, the reality is I would probably listen to the audio of it, but I would hold on to the book, and just in case I eventually read it. Then I got Attic by Katherine Dunn. I had read Geek Love in my early 20s, and I remember loving it. I'm kind of afraid to read it because I'm worried that it might feel problematic or bad now. But I hadn't realized that anything else Katherine Dunn had published was in print. So I saw this in my local used bookstore, I think, and I immediately snapped up a copy. I've heard mixed to negative things about it, and it is supposed to be sort of stream of consciousnness, although it is tiny. And the fact that it is tiny is what has made me hold on to it, even though I've heard some mixed to negative things again, because it just feels like if I sit down and read this, it'll probably read quickly, and then I would know. It's not taking up a lot of space on my shelf. So it's fine for now, but there's no urgency I have to read it, to be honest. Then there was Willa and Hesper by Amy Feltman. I waffled back and forth about whether or not I was going to hold on to that book or keep it. I read the opening chapter and didn't like it, so I got rid of it. So that was ultimately how I decided whether or not I was going to hold on to it or not. Then there was The Gallery by John Horan Burns. This was supposed to be something I read last year as part of the Queer TBR tackle, and I didn't get around to it. Jen the Librarian did and didn't like it. So this is sort of in a limbo space right now, but I would still like to read it. It's sort of a forgotten queer classic book. And for that reason, I'm still a little curious. So maybe I'll eventually get around to it, but there's not much urgency. And then I had gotten Karamo, My Story of Embracing Purpose, Healing, and Hope by Karamo Brown. And I read it. And, you know, I didn't feel like I needed to hold on to it. Obviously, Karamo is from Queer Eye. And yeah, it was fine. It was everything I kind of expected it to be. So of the 7 books I brought into my library in April of 2019, I've only read one, and that was Karamo's book. Don't judge me. And I've unhauled 3. So not great. Overall, in my April book hauls, I have brought 31 books into my library, and I've only read 12, which is, you know, almost half, I guess. But I feel pretty good about a lot of the books that I still have, especially the more recent ones. I've only unhauled 8, which is not bad. And there are a couple of books that there's nothing in immediate danger of being unhauled, but there are a couple of books that if I still haven't read them in a year or two, I might seriously start thinking about whether or not I need to hold on to them, and that's all. So that's ultimately not bad. If you have thoughts about any of these books, recommendations for which ones you think I should get to at some point, or recommendations just based on my interest in any of these books that are now scattered all over my desk, let me know in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.